Welcome, everyone. I am Michael Santoro, Professor of Management and Entrepreneurship at the Leavey School of Business at Santa Clara University. For those who are new to our school, Santa Clara University is the Jesuit university located in the epicenter of Silicon Valley. Santa Clara also holds the distinction of being the oldest college or university in the state of California. The Leavey School of Business is also this year celebrating our 100th anniversary. Today's webcast is the second in a speaker series on the theme of artificial intelligence and human rights. The third event will be held on December 6th, and we will send everyone information about that. Before I introduce today's speakers, I want to set out the procedure for asking questions after they present. Please ask your questions in the Q&A box. We will try to get as many of you as we can. If we choose your question, we will unmute you. Please begin by giving your name and affiliation, such as SCU alum or SCU current student. Please state your question or a short comment, and then we will then turn to the speakers to address your question or comments. Please try to be brief so that we can get to as many questions as we can. Thank you. Now I have the honor of introducing our two distinguished speakers. Our main speaker, Emmie Hine, is a research associate at the Yale Digital Ethics Center and a PhD candidate in law, science, and technology at the University of Bologna, where she researches the ethics and governance of emerging technologies in different geopolitical contexts. Her dissertation focuses on the human rights impacts of XR technologies, but she also researches the ethical and policy implications of AI and other technologies. Emmie obtained a master's degree in social science, the social science of the internet, as a Shirley Scholar at the University of Oxford. Before she embarked on a scholarly and public policy career, Emmie was a full-stack software engineer at an enterprise data management software company in Boston. She holds a bachelor's degree in computer science and Chinese with a concentration in science and technology studies from Williams College. She is proficient in English and Mandarin, but her favorite language, she says, is TypeScript. Our discussant, Brienne Ghafourifar, is a full-stack entrepreneur on a mission to build disruptive technologies that can help people live and work better. As co-founder of Entify, a Palo Alto-based AI and hyper-automation company, she works at the intersection of human-computer interactions and advanced automation systems. Her research and development work has resulted in 14 issued patents from the US Patent Office, primarily in the domains of artificial intelligence and digital communication. Brienne's work has been featured in academic and mainstream publications, including Forbes and Fast Company, and she actively participates in international conferences addressing the future of AI technologies and women's leadership in STEM fields. She was notably featured in the documentary She Started It, examining global perspectives on technology and entrepreneurship. Brienne completed her bachelor's degree in economics from the Leavey School of Business with a focus on technology markets and entrepreneurship. Her academic work caught attention when she became the youngest college graduate to secure significant venture funding for technological research and development. I should point out that Brienne was 17 at the time. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Emmie to give her speech.
Thank you, Michael, for that great introduction. It's an honor to be here, and I'm excited for the discussion that I'll have with Brienne and then with all of the rest of you after this presentation. So let me just pull up my slides. All right, so hello, everyone. Today we'll be talking about, as the title says, rethinking human rights in the age of AI and XR, extended reality. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But first, I want to address, the elephant in the room, which is, why should I care about extended reality if I'm not involved in it in some significant capacity. Maybe you think, oh, I'm not a gamer. I don't own a VR headset. I don't have, I don't have a $3,500 Apple Vision Pro. And that is true for a lot of people right now, who are not, I will be the first to confess that I have a headset that I do not use all that often. But I think that there are two arguments to be made for why, even if XR is not your primary area of study or interest, that we, as people who are interested in AI and human rights and technology, we should care about it. And one is that, well, XR is still a growing field of technology. So even if you don't use it or interact with it in a significant capacity, you probably will down the line. But that's sort of the businessy argument. But then the more philosophical one, the one that I'll be making more here, is that thinking about human rights in extended reality helps us think about human rights elsewhere in technology, including in AI, which is, as I'll talk about, really interwoven into XR and the tech stack. And so that's something that I want you to hold on to throughout this talk. And so talk for about 35 or 40 minutes, and then Brienne and I will have a discussion, then we'll bring in some of your questions. So let's get started. We'll talk first about some of the more sort of philosophical underpinnings of my research about power and different kinds of mediation, and then we'll dive into some specific human rights impacts of extended reality. So let's get going. And I start off with a premise, which is that the virtual is real. Oftentimes we contrast the virtual world with the real world, when by real world we really mean physical world, because the virtual is not fake. Virtual things impact us in real ways. If you think about, when you see a cute cat picture on Instagram, you feel good. Or when you see, hopefully none of you have experienced this, but I'm sure that many of you have. If you're getting harassed on Twitter, that also impacts you in a real way. And so in order to kind of be on the same page about the human rights impacts of technology as a whole, and especially XR, we need to kind of start with this premise that the virtual is real. So now that we have that common ground, we can talk a little bit about what makes XR so distinct. And so there are three areas of three pillars to virtual reality realism: presence, immersion, and interactivity. And those three things combine to provide a very realistic feeling experience. But all areas of XR have that to some degree. So extended reality is kind of an umbrella category. It depends on who you ask, but in my view, it's an umbrella category that encompasses virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality, if you think that that's a thing. And then I focus on what we call immersive extended reality, or IXR, which are XR applications, devices that fully mediate your visual context. And so that could be a VR headset. It could be a pair of AR glasses, like Google Glass, may it rest in peace. It may be other applications that we haven't come up with yet, but what it's not is smartphone AR. It's not the, third down line on your television screen when you're watching football. Those things are interesting, but they just to define the boundaries of things that we consider morally significant, we've established this concept of immersive extended reality. And so that'll be what I'm primarily referring to today. And then where does AI come in? So AI and XR are distinct technologies, and they exist without each other. But AI is a really important enabling technology for XR. It's kind of embedded throughout the tech stack in various levels of importance. So on the very sort of baseline level, AI helps stitch the video feeds from a device's cameras together. It helps with the spatial audio. It tracks your hands and controller movements, tracks your eyes. There's then, within the platforms, you've got 3D modeling and physics simulations, like in many video games, natural language processing for voice commands, and then more novel things like personalized experiences, generative world building for 3D content, and then content moderation, which As we know, automated content moderation is very important on a lot of online platforms, and we'll talk more about that specifically in relationship to XR. And then something else that'll come up again are artificial avatars, or NPCs, as they're called in video games, that could be powered by AI. So I listed all this not to give you a product pitch, but just to show that AI is really interwoven throughout the XR tech stack. And so, we're talking about them together because they have they've had these kind of slightly off phase cycles of hype and maturation. So the metaverse came around in late 2021. It's all anyone was talking about. And then it faded, and then Gen AI comes around, and all of a sudden it's the only thing that anyone is talking about, and the metaverse fades into the background. Now, XR is more than just the metaverse, of course. It includes augmented reality and non-metaverse applications, but I use it as a proxy for interest. And I think in many ways that's a good thing, because the 2 years that that interest in XR has waned has provided some time for technological maturation. And then you have the same for XR has been, or for AI has been making a lot of technological progress in the last couple of years, and now they're kind of intertwining in ways that advances them both, and brings them more into the consumer sphere. So now let's talk a little bit about human rights. I'll refer to them sometimes as human rights, sometimes as fundamental rights. Perhaps I'm a bad academic. I mean them more or less interchangeably. My PhD is based in Europe. They really like fundamental rights there. Also, it sounds better when I'm talking about fundamentally mediated realities, but if it makes you feel better, you can put the word human in whenever I say fundamental. But so what do I mean by a fundamentally mediated reality? So mediation is the concept of something between you and something else, something that interfaces between two things. And I argue that XR, extended reality, is a fundamentally mediated reality because it depends on a very fundamental level on technology, on devices, on platforms, on the decisions that those platforms and companies are making about those things that get between you and your ability to interface with that reality. I can walk outside right now and I can smell the roses, and no one can stop me. I don't have to put on a headset. I don't have to pay for a special device to do that. I can just do that. But that's not the case in extended reality. In extended reality, every sensory experience requires a device, and every social experience requires a platform. And so because of that, there's really no escaping this mediation. So, and that creates some really interesting philosophical questions of power and implications for who's controlling and impacting our human rights. And so I argued that we have these kind of levels of cascading mediation. So at the top, you have platform companies that are making decisions about their platforms, about content moderation, about things that very fundamentally impact the user's social experiences. And then you have hardware companies that are making decisions that more affect their sensory experiences. You have the devices, which then within the constraints set by the hardware companies are feeding sensory information to the users, and then the users finally are able to make decisions about their experiences within the broad confines of the decisions that have been made upstream. And so we have these cascading levels of mediation and power. So we'll talk a little bit about platform companies. And you can think about platform companies as the governments of extended reality. They're the ones who are making decisions about the content moderation policies, so behavioral policies, what is allowed. In other words, the laws of that of that reality. They're making decisions about how policies are enforced. Are they enforced equitably? They're making decisions about what data they're collecting and how they're using it, which impacts how comfortable people are using the platform. And then they also influence the next level down by not necessarily dictating, but influencing what they want the hardware to support. And when hardware and platform companies are intertwined, like say Meta, then this becomes kind of an interesting question of, okay, well, who's influencing whom? But platform companies are kind of the top level of mediation. And then hardware companies are the ones that mediate sensory experiences. So epistemological just means basically it's about knowledge. And so they're defining the data collection possibilities through sensors and how they design the device. And this impacts the user's sensory experience. So what they can what they can see and hear, how well they can see and hear. They're also making decisions that have direct accessibility concerns. So is this device usable by people with disabilities or people with natural hair? Things like that. These are the decisions that hardware companies are making, and platform companies also make decisions about, okay, is my platform or my app accessible? And there aren't many standards are still being worked out, and so these are kind of live issues that actually impact a lot of people's experiences. And then the device itself impacts your direct sensory experiences within the decisions that the hardware company has made. So it affects how you interact with the physical world and the virtual world. So the physical world, one of the kind of clearest things to consider is, okay, is this a see-through device or a pass-through device? And a see-through device is like a pair of glasses. You can see through it. It's a transparent lens. You're looking straight through the glass at the physical world. And then pass-through are devices like the Meta Quest Pro or the Apple Vision Pro, where it is kind of mimicking transparency, where you have essentially a box over your eyes, but then inside that box are video screens that are showing you a feed of the world around you. So it's simulating this transparency that has a higher level of mediation than a see-through device. And the technical stats of that device are going to impact how well you perceive the world. So you can see these devices have different interpupillary distance ranges. They have different resolutions. They have different subpixel layouts. In physical reality, you don't have to think about the subpixel layout of your eyes because they are just your eyes. But in extended reality, you have this additional level of technological mediation. And so this also impacts how you interact with virtual worlds and virtual experiences. And oftentimes your experience quality varies directly with your device quality, which affects this, how many senses you have. So is it just audio visual, or do I have other sensory devices that are, at this point still more novelties than anything else, but more and more are being brought to market. Now, we return again to these device comparisons. You think, okay, well, the Apple Vision Pro is a lot better, so of course I should just get that. Well, then you consider that it's 7 times more expensive than the Meta Quest 3, and maybe you reconsider. And this speaks to, I think, another issue of the mediation of reality, which is that you depend on devices and platforms, but these things aren't free. And so in erecting a cost barrier to accessing the reality and then to how well you access the reality, you risk shutting people out. So, which is another kind of accessibility concern. So you have interwoven through each level of mediation, different accessibility concerns. And so then we get to the user level. Once all of the decisions have been made up the stack, what can they still do? Well, they can make decisions about what experiences they choose to go to, how they're using the device, what physical environment they're using it in, how they present themselves. But again, user presentation is mediated by, well, okay, what is the platform letting me present myself as? We'll talk a little bit more about this down the line, but basically I've gone through all of this to present the question, are fundamentally mediated realities fundamentally unequal ones? When you have to buy a device, when you have to experience a reality interface through the device and through a platform that is owned by a company, is it possible to have true equality? And now we'll talk, I'm reminded of some of you may have read Snow Crash, where there are, there's a metaverse, and people with their own devices have, full color, very glitzy avatars, and people who are accessing it through like free public terminals have these kind of grainy black and white avatars. It's not subtle, but it is an effective way of conveying that this alternative reality really may not be. Obviously, our physical world has a lot of inequalities, but they aren't baked in on the same level as extended reality with these cascading levels of mediation. So now we'll turn and discuss some specific human rights, and we'll start with safety. And in my research, I use the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's a lot of debate over, is it universal? Is that? It's kind of the best we have, and so that's what I'll be referring to. And the way I see it, there are three levels of safety. You've got physical safety, which is protecting your physical body. You have mental safety, so protecting your mental health and stability, and then you have social safety, because you can argue that really to be truly safe, you have to live in a stable and secure society. And I think extended reality poses some interesting questions across all three of these. So on the one hand, you have incidental harms that just happen, accidentally as a result of using the technology, like cyber sickness, which incidentally disproportionately affects women, possibly because headsets, their interpupillary range, the distance that it assumes you have between your pupils, are typically calibrated to men. And then, so that's one bit of inequality that's baked in. One thing that's just, an accident is like, okay, you run into your coffee table. And that's not something that we focus on much, but it is something that companies are addressing with, safety boundaries and things like that. But anyway, more interesting are the intentional harms, like hacking. You can take over someone's headset interface and kind of a man-in-the-middle attack, and you can have all the you can basically see what they're seeing and manipulate it in kind of interesting and alarming ways, lead them into places they don't necessarily want to go. And then there also the affordances of a virtual world also provide new ways to harm people. So there was an attack a couple of years ago on a journalist on Twitter who has epilepsy. Someone sent him a strobing GIF, and it caused a seizure. Well, in a 3D immersive environment, you've got more ways to attack people like that. They're called environmental attacks. So maybe you create a whole room that's just strobing GIFs, or maybe that someone has a phobia of something, and you create summon tons of giant spiders, things like that. It doesn't have to be in virtual reality. This can also be done with augmented reality devices as well. There's a lot of really interesting and again concerning ways to cause physical harm. And the same is true of mental safety. And we again break these down. So there's some mental safety risks that are caused by other users. So unfortunately, harassment is a huge issue on a lot of VR platforms. So there's kind of this famous story where Horizon Worlds was in beta testing, and pretty much immediately one of the first women to beta test this was sexually harassed and groped in virtual reality. And Meta kind of really quickly scrambled and installed this personal safety barrier, this little bubble of a few feet around you. But when that wasn't something that was on their radar prior to testing, it shows how much it matters who's making the decision and who has the power to make these calls. People are also reporting cyber stalking, which feels very visceral and real in virtual reality, because again, this triggers a lot of the same physiological and psychological reactions as experiences in the physical world. And so that heightens kind of the importance of thinking about human rights in these virtual settings. Then there are also risks that are facilitated by platforms, not necessarily deliberately, but just through as a result of the platform. So virtual reality has been linked to certain psychological disorders, although, as I'll mention later, it can also treat some mental disorders. There are anecdotal reports of that it encourages alcohol misuse, because in VR, the nightlife never ends. And when you're sitting at home alone with a headset on, it's really hard to tell how much you've drunk. There are addiction questions, and then also questions of children's vulnerability. Children's rights are a huge topic, and obviously children have human rights too, and they are uniquely vulnerable to issues in XR because of things like grooming. But then also they are their brains and bodies are still developing, and VR can kind of mess with their perception of reality in really interesting and concerning ways. And so there's also been research that shows that kids tend to treat virtual assistants quite rudely, and then treat people in their lives more rudely as well. And so if you end up if you have kids in VR interacting with NPCs and doing so rudely, then they may be ruder in real life, although a lot of these are kind of speculative and require more research. We try not to go down the sort of full science fiction rabbit hole. But then you've got issues that could be deliberately caused by platforms. So I'm sure a lot of you remember the Facebook emotional contagion experiment, where they tweaked the emotional content of people's Facebook feeds to see how much happy content, how much sad content they posted after, and they found that they actually did have a small but significant effect on people's emotions. Then you consider, well, okay, when you've got this immersive 3D setting, what does that mean for how they can influence my emotions? And I'm not saying that any platforms are doing this, but it is, the immersion is an important factor to consider when you're thinking about these kinds of experiments and what sort of consent might be required. Now we'll move on to social stability, and we won't linger a ton on this, but there's concerns, like I said, with children about normalizing harassment and what leaks from online, offline. The EU has written a bit about security concerns with terrorist groups using VR and digital twins to indoctrinate and train people, but then B, also plan attacks. And then there are questions for democracy as well. Our system of government requires some baseline shared agreement about reality. And we can look out the window and agree that the sky is blue in the physical world, but in extended reality, you can't necessarily, you can't know if the thing that you're seeing is the same as the thing as the person next to you. So this may not be a huge concern if, say, I'm wearing a pair of AR glasses and I'm walking down the street and I see a billboard for Coke, and my friend sees a billboard for Pepsi. But if it quickly gets more concerning if all of a sudden you're seeing everyone at the sidewalk cafe is drinking Coke, even though in reality they're drinking lattes or spritzes or whatever. And then it gets even more concerning when you enter a virtual environment and you realize that quite literally everything around you can be changed and manipulated. And so even if you're standing right next to someone, you have no guarantee that what you're seeing is anything close to what they're seeing. And so extended reality is a reality that lacks a baseline agreement on what that reality is. And I think there's some really kind of interesting and concerning questions there about what it means for, okay, well, what can we agree on? And one of the things that might exacerbate this is the idea of these artificial avatars that I think it's Louis Rosenberg who's really concerned about having these NPC avatars that can use your biometric micro data and micro reactions to persuade you, to nudge you, to change their arguments and manipulate you into believing something that they want to believe. Again, that hasn't come about, but it's something that's been flagged in the literature. So now, speaking of biometric data, let's turn to privacy. Now, privacy often gets boiled down just to data protection. I know that this is really long, but I've bolded the important words. And I want to highlight that it's not just, data protection is not at all mentioned in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But what is mentioned are things like family, home, correspondence. And that means that we have to take a sort of three-pronged approach to privacy. So you have informational privacy, which can be boiled down to, okay, data protection, data privacy. But then you also have decisional and local privacy. So decisional privacy is the right to make personal decisions without interference. So decisions about your body, about your family, things like that. And then local privacy is the right to have a local space, a physical space, or as I'll argue, virtual space, where you can just be without anybody observing you and interfering with your behavior. And informational privacy is really interesting in XR because you have these again, because it is mediated by these devices that are collecting data, you have basically this trove of biometric data. And a lot of this is not identifiable in the same sense as a fingerprint or a retina scan is immediately identifiable, but it is identifiable if you aggregate enough of these data points. And so we need to make sure that our data protection legislation is up to the task of dealing with these kind of new forms of aggregate biometric data. You can also use a lot of this data to infer sensitive protected characteristics. So gait data can help tell if someone has Alzheimer's, for example. So there's all of these, it interfaces with medical data. And then the awareness that all of this is being collected can also potentially chill how someone behaves in extended reality. So if you're aware that you're being observed, you may not go somewhere or do something. And this also speaks to issues of decisional privacy. You want your avatar movements and user actions to be private sometimes, but it's unlikely that they will or that they can be. As I talked about before, there's questions of micro-reaction nudging. And then you can argue that not only are the decisions, decisional privacy is not just the decisions that you're making, but also the decisions that are being made about you. So can your employers use XR data to make decisions about, whether they're going to fire you? Can they use your eye tracking data to decide that, oh, so-and-so wasn't paying enough attention at work, so they're on the chopping block? These are questions that the AI Act is beginning to address, but legislation in a lot of other places is not. And then you have local privacy, which I think should apply in a virtual world as it does in the physical world. Because in this, if we're analogizing again to the physical world, you should have you have the right to a space where you can be without observation. But again, the question of what does it mean to exist in a world without observation in this mediated reality is is one that we don't know how that works. It doesn't mean that a platform isn't collecting data. Some amount of data has to be collected just to make the platform run, to allow your avatar to move, things like that. Cameras have to be on, but a lot of platforms record a certain amount of video for content moderation purposes. But all of this monitoring and datafication is constantly happening, and a lot of it is baked into the platform. So what local privacy really looks like in XR is a outstanding question. There's also the question of bystander data. So like I said, headsets are covered in, in cameras, and not all of them are pointing in. A lot of them are pointing out. And so anyone who's around you is also being observed by these devices. And a few years ago, Facebook got in trouble for making shadow profiles of people who didn't have Facebook accounts, but who were just, online. And they would use that to serve them ads and things like that. You could feasibly do something similar with XR bystander data. But you can also, because it is that biometric data, you can make inferences about how groups relate to each other, whether, especially if they're in VR. Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford did this really interesting experiment where he held a class entirely in VR and then looked at how people were looking at each other and relating to each other. And you can you can figure out, okay, well, these people like each other, these people don't, these people, respond to each other. And so there's just so many things that you can do with this biometric data. And we're not really, our legal system is not really equipped to deal with it. So now we'll turn to the rights to freedom of assembly and expression. And the key in the UDHR is the idea of peaceful assembly and association. And we're seeing, XR has some really interesting implications for assembly. So in the physical world, you have immersive AR games that could be gathering people. I mean, a non-immersive example is Pokemon Go, where people are gathering in parks and stuff. That actually created some legal cases in the US where the parks didn't want Pokemon Go players in, but eventually they had to. Then AR could also be used at protests. It could be used by protesters to organize and to direct people, but it could also be used by law enforcement, especially, they're building AR glasses that are equipped with facial recognition. And the AI Act has banned that for a reason, real-time biometric identification by law enforcement, because it could be a really effective way to identify a lot of protesters very, very quickly. And we accept that you have some right to privacy at a protest that kind of steps over the line. But then there's also the potential for virtual assembly, so private gatherings with friends, but then also protests and demonstrations and gatherings, which are already starting to happen in these in virtual settings. But the question is, okay, well, what does a virtual protest mean? Like, yes, it's great that it's more it's easier to get to, it's more accessible. You don't have to travel, you can assemble instantaneously, but is it just a new form of clicktivism where you say, okay, well, I sent my avatar, and maybe you're not even in your avatar, maybe you're just sending an automated version of your avatar, and then you pat yourself on the back for supporting a cause. This is something that we don't know the answer to. And then there's also the question of, okay, well, what assemblies are these companies, our platform companies, allowing? There's been questions of Meta self-privileging their own events over those of others, but I think the more concerning question is, well, what protests are they allowing? What assemblies are they allowing? In the physical world, our governments are bound by laws and constitutions over that dictate what assemblies they allow and how, are there permits required, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not the case in virtual worlds. And so again, these platform companies can make decisions however they want to about what assembly to they allow, and it's a lot of power to put in their hands. And something similar holds for expression, where I think one of the really interesting key phrases in the UDHR is the idea that you have the right to seek, receive, and impart information through any media and regardless of frontiers, which pretty clearly involves online settings, the internet, extended reality. And so we break this down into a few different forms of speech. You've got commercial speech, political speech, and then other forms of speech. And broadly, the benefits is that this allows new forms of expression. You can, you know, uh, this is a non-immersive example, but you can put an IKEA can serve you an AR ad or let you, try its product in your house. Political and concerts, political rallies and concerts, you can have them in VR. But then um, there's also risks, which, like I was saying, with assembly, come with arbitrary platform restrictions on what forms of expression they're allowing. We're seeing some of this with Twitter and X arbitrarily banning journalists that they don't like, or accounts that Elon Musk doesn't like the account that tracked his jet. But again, it's more I think more impactful and more concerning, because you're not especially with a VR platform, you're not just saying, okay, you can't put this 280 character piece of text on the internet. You're saying you physically cannot stand um, in this 3D immersive space and speak, um, which again is like a government saying, no, you cannot get up on in this public square and speak. There's also the question of government pressure campaigns over content, which I think speaks to some of the difficulties of content moderation that we'll talk about. XR is a space where, especially immersive virtual social platforms, where users from across the world can gather together. And the question is, okay, well, what laws applies? What kinds of speech are we permitting? Different countries have different kinds of speech they allow, and different speech that they don't allow. Russia doesn't allow LGBTQ content on its internet, but that's something that we've, outside of Russia, generally decided is okay. And so the question is, well, what happens when Russia decides that they don't want that content on a platform? Are they going to harass this company, threaten them with sanctions, or expel them from the country? And how will that company respond? We're seeing that with X and India, which is was pressuring Elon Musk, the free speech absolutist, to remove content, which he did. And then one form of this also speaks to user representation, which, again, do you what so take an avatar, for example. How what options are available for that user to express themselves, again, is decided by the platform, and possibly within the bounds of what a country has decided is okay. But there are questions there are questions of, okay, well, do you allow someone to make the avatar visibly queer? Or can everyone see that? Or do you make it look different for some users, other users? That's maybe an extreme example, but then you think about, okay, well, disability representation. Meta has 5 quintillion possible avatar combinations or something like that, but you can't have a wheelchair, you can't have a cane. So it's questions like that of who's able to be represented, and how that we have to think about. And one thing that's really important to talk more about is harassment, which might be more prevalent in extended reality, unfortunately, than it is in the physical reality, because you have this online disinhibition effect, which is why people behave terribly on Twitter, because when you are online and you perceive it as just a game, and you think you're more anonymous, then you're more inclined to behave badly. And bad behavior is really difficult to address in XR, because content moderation, it's not just content. It's not just words and text on a screen. It's conduct. It's how people are behaving. And that's really difficult to moderate algorithmically, because it's really difficult to characterize conduct for an algorithm, and even 3D immersive content as well. But then human moderation doesn't scale if you're talking about having, everyone, if you're talking about having, a massive online 3D platform. And so how platforms balance that is still ongoing. Most of them right now are only human moderation. And right now it's not proving adequate. Then you also have issues like the potential for increase in child sexual abuse material and avatar deepfakes as well that are kind of novel emerging risks. And then I'll briefly touch on a couple of other rights like education. So the dream is, okay, well, you give a headset to every child and they can attend metaverse university and it'll be so much better than Zoom school. And that may be the case, but it ignores that there's a lot of enabling infrastructure for extended reality. Not only do you need to get them the headsets, you also need to make sure that these kids have sufficiently fast internet. And that's not the case even in the US. Something like a quarter of households don't have high-speed broadband. And if you extend it to the rest of the world, well, billions of people don't have access to the internet, period. And so we can't let this be a sort of silver bullet that we think, okay, well, we'll snap our fingers and the metaverse will solve everything, because it won't. There's a lot of other issues that we need to solve first. And there's something similar happening with healthcare. VR has the potential to treat a lot of mental health conditions, actually. Back in the 80s, one of the first applications of a VR headset was to treat aphasia in veterans. And again, the dream is, okay, well, this could increase access to treatment, access to doctors, but we need more research to make sure that these are effective treatments that scale. B, we need to make sure that our medical device approval processes are built to handle this. And then C, we need to make sure that we have enough doctors and enough headsets and enough internet for people to be able to access this. So again, a lot of potential, but we need to be careful with how we're talking about this. And then the last bit of the UDHR I'll talk about is Article 27, which is kind of a forgotten one, but it's about the freedom to share in scientific advancement. And XR could be a really interesting opportunity to reinterpret it. Some people argue that we should use this as that we should use Article 27 as a justification for enshrining the right to internet access, which hasn't been successful yet. But you could make the same argument for extended reality, especially if it becomes a sort of integral part of how we function in the world. But then again, you're making because it's a mediated reality, you're making decisions about what is the minimum acceptable level of reality, how many senses, what resolution. That's just an interesting philosophical question that I wanted to flag. But okay, so the point of all of this is that I want to make it clear that we do not check our human rights at the virtual door. It is not a dichotomy where you have in the physical world you have human rights and in a virtual environment you don't. But I think that we need to think about it on a spectrum of embodiment. So like I said before, the more immersed you are, the more embodied you are, the more your body reacts to experiences as if you were in the physical world. And that means that we need to be more concerned about your human rights and your rights in that physical world and or in that virtual setting. We've accepted that we have some level we have some right to speak online, and then you take that to the virtual world, and you have to be the platform has an even greater responsibility to think about how it's allowing you to express yourself, because again, it's immersive, it's embodied. That speech carries more weight than typing on a screen, and so I think we need to think about not only how immersed you are, but what role this platform is playing in your life. Speech on a game may be less important than speech in some sort of virtual, the equivalent of a virtual town square. So there's a few different elements that we need to think about when we're considering how do we protect human rights online, in immersive environments, and how do we what amount of power do we grant to these platform companies, these hardware companies that are making the decisions that impact us all. And I think that if we adopt this kind of idea of embodiment and how much of a public function is this platform performing, then it gives us a really compelling way to think about human rights, not just in XR, but also on the internet as a whole. So I hope that I have left you with the conviction that of the fundamentally mediated extended reality that we're creating requires fundamental rights protections, but also that we need to extend this up and down the mediation spectrum, and that we can use extended reality to think about how we consider rights, human rights, not only in immersive settings, but in our digital world as a whole. So thank you all really very much. And I'm really excited to have a chat with Brienne and then with all the rest of you.
Wow, Emmie, I don't
This
know.
is
Maybe
really
I should
exciting.
just jump in. There's so many things we could be talking about. I think we're going to run out of time. I was making notes about all the things that we should discuss.
Sorry, I went on a little bit. But,
Oh, this is so exciting. I think there's so many good nuggets here for us to think about, not only as consumers, but also as technologists. There was something that you showed about platform and hardware and applications and users, devices and users, right? And there are so many things to think about there. I think the platform companies are controlling a lot of the other steps. And I think as consumers, we don't necessarily think about what kind of implications that can have when we're leveraging different devices or utilizing different applications or putting different units and diving into different experiences. We're not really thinking about the full picture all the time. So I think it's really important to have that 360 perspective that you're bringing in, with some of the research. I think at the same time, in some ways, the power of usage and the power of users coming in different groups and the power of social is in some ways also driving behavior the other direction as well. And I think that dynamic, it's fascinating. And I think in both directions, especially with the platform companies down, that power can be so strong, that dynamic can be so strong that it's also driving regulation. And I think to some extent, technology is further ahead than the regulatory forces, which is another challenge that everybody's dealing with, right?
Yeah.
The technology advancements are just moving so fast that everybody else is trying to keep up. And making sure that consumers are taken care of from a privacy perspective, that our data is secure, and every combination in between. So I don't know if you had any additional thoughts on that, but that was something that kind of stood out to me in your presentation that I
no,
quite liked.
absolutely. I think the question of how does feedback make its way up the chain is a really interesting and important one. I think that's something one area where you sort of see that is with the kind of popularization of smart glasses and AR. So Meta comes around, they change their name, they push the metaverse, Horizon Worlds, this is the way that people are going to be experiencing virtual reality and extended reality. And it is, they went sort of all in. And then people responded very tepidly. Part of it was there were, it was maybe not a product that was ready for launch, but part of it was that people don't necessarily want a 3D virtual social world to interact with. But then the Meta Ray-Bans come around and they're not an AR, they're not an XR product, they're smart glasses. They have you can talk to an AI assistant and it can play music and stuff, but that form factor is the one that people are flocking towards. They've sold way more units of them than they ever really dreamed of. And so I think that you're seeing a shift in the market more towards low profile AR devices. And so in that way you've got this feedback kind of coming up the stack. And then yeah, I think I totally agree with you your point about regulation. I think it's good regulation is flexible and can be applied to a multitude of technologies. So the AI Act is will have some applicability to some of the issues that we've talked about. In the US, HIPAA is here to protect your health data, things like that. But there are definitely gaps, and so I wrote a paper on safety and privacy from the European perspective, and we pointed out, like, okay, this is where the GDPR could be improved, where the AI Act could be improved. These are the holes in the DSA and DMA. I don't think anyone, we're not saying, okay, we need to have an XR Act, because a lot of these regulations are, good and flexible and can be built on or interpreted in certain ways, but it does raise these it does raise a lot of questions that we're going to need to address.
Oh, absolutely. I think the XR arena, right, as you kind of described and broke it out, you've so amazingly articulated what's happening in that world. And I think just shining a light on the potential pitfalls of not being educated about how to live in that world, it's so important, right? We've all grown up learning about how to separate, what's real and what's fake in the physical world, that now that we're talking about a world of XR, it's a whole different kind of education, right?
Yeah.
So I think that education is really important. And for those of us that are still younger, that's true about the social world too, right? We're making those mistakes each generation. And the XR world is really not so different. It's clear, though, that the stakes are getting higher and higher. Scale of data aggregation is growing. Behavioral profiling is still a consideration. Intelligent content is just constantly increasing. So I think that's really an important discussion, and it's a good topic that you covered. One of the things that came to mind as you were also speaking was about data privacy. I think it's a huge area of concern. We think a lot about AI. We deal with the AI world mostly in enterprise, but we think about it a lot in consumer. We have a lot of patents in the space around data privacy, privacy preserving machine learning, just general content security on data security, even in infrastructure. And just thinking about a world of, dealing with deep fakes and thinking about your profile going online and thinking that somebody can take control of your information and represent your presence in an online community. It's a scary concept. So figuring out how to use these tools securely, ethically, properly. The companies out there know a lot more than we do as consumers. So when we're going into that universe and into those conversations and we're leveraging the technologies that we are today, which is multifold, it's important that we have that education and understand what we're utilizing every step of the way. So I think that's a really important part of the conversation.
No, absolutely.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
No, I was going to say, I think it's kind of two-pronged. I think that there's education that needs to happen on the platform level. Like, I know that some of these big platforms, one of the questions that they're thinking about is, okay, how do we convey, the acceptable behavior standards to people? How do we create this kind of, new social order in these spaces to make it so that people, behave better? But then it also comes from, I think, external sources and educational efforts with, okay, what does it mean that I'm using this technology? What forms of data are at risk? What am I opening myself up to by using this technology? And so again, this kind of multi-pronged efforts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you think about XR today and its intersection with AI, what scares you the most if you were to provide advice to new people using these new devices and headsets? You talked a little bit about, the physical risks, and that was actually really interesting information about for males and females, right? Something that you wouldn't necessarily think about as a consumer. But if you were to provide some advice for younger people that are thinking about getting involved in, metaverse or taking, an interest in new gaming experiences or having, avatars in the digital world, what advice would you be giving them, if they wanted to engage in these activities?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think, it's got to be harassment. Like, it's a really pervasive issue on a lot of these platforms. And I think, we have it's going back to what you were saying. We have sort of behavioral standards in the physical world, and we know, okay, I'm a woman and there are some streets that I don't walk on alone at night, but we don't know that about these virtual environments yet. There's no there's no sort of warning label when you enter a virtual world that, okay, there's, a group of guys behaving badly here, or like, okay, this is the kind of thing that you might experience here. I think that the physical impacts of using these devices is getting better. They're getting lighter. One of the physical concerns that we had 30 years ago was just the weight of the device on your head, because they weighed like 10 pounds and had to be supported by an independent crane. And obviously that's something that we worry about less now. They're not necessarily the most comfortable things in the world, but it's moving. It's progressing, and obviously companies have a big incentive to make these devices lighter and more usable. They also have an incentive to make their platforms usable, but it's a much more difficult, the thorny social questions are much more difficult than the thorny technical questions.
That's right. Exactly. I think you also made a great point earlier about representation, right? Content moderation. I think, to me, knowing how to productively live in an XR world, it starts with truly understanding the consequences of our own actions, right? So the problem with early internet was that for the longest time, there didn't seem to be any real consequences for like trolling or cyberbullying. I mean, you covered some of this. But if we think about going back in that time, there were no real repercussions for that, right? But now we're beginning to know better, and I think at least we're more conscious of it. But I think putting some of those ramifications in place for that kind of behavior is going to be a necessary step, and treating those really seriously, because that problem is only going to grow if it doesn't have the attention that it deserves. As these tools are being used by more people, and especially by young people. And I think that's the growing concern, at least for those of us, right, that spend a lot of time in the space. The more and more young people that engage in these kind of technologies, which they inevitably are, right? I mean, at such a young age, they're getting involved with these devices.
Yeah.
They're becoming more fluent than we are, even at our age. So I think it's really important that those, like you said, kind of terms and warnings and even parental understanding and controls are put in place at an early stage before the engagement starts.
Yeah.
So
I refuse to believe that we're over the hill yet, Brienne, but no, you make a really good point, which is that, bad behavior will happen in these spaces, and there have to be deterrence and repercussions for that behavior. And some of this is, some of it will be platform sanctions. Okay, you can't, your account is restricted, or you're banned from this platform. But then you've also got the question of criminal liability. So the UK police right now are investigating a case of sexual assault in on a metaverse platform, and to see, can this be adjudicated under our existing assault laws? And then you got the question, okay, well, if it can't be, then should we adjust these laws to account for this? Because this is, VR harassment and assault has real impacts. It is genuinely traumatic for the victims. And so you've got, but then in a lot of cases, the legal questions are unanswered, and the legal framework is not set up to support them. And so that's one of many issues that we're going to have to address.
I totally agree. And I think the human rights perspective that you're covering and spending so much time in, it's a extremely worthy and important topic. It's a topic that people don't spend enough time in, I would say, especially in the technology space, because it's so easy to forget, especially being in this space, that the digital worlds these days, it's just as real as the physical world. I mean, we're on a conference call with everybody in this room. And, 5-10 years ago, we would have been in a physical room, and this wouldn't have even been a concept, right? And now it's becoming a norm. So in some ways, because of the instant scale that's happened, the digital behavior is becoming even more important than the physical world, because of how fast it can grow and because of how fast behavior can change, right? And we're seeing that reflect in our daily lives, I mean, constantly. I think it's because of that, it's an even more important problem than any of us even realize, how fast behavior can change as a result of what's happening in the digital world, and how fast technology is just altering our behavior all the time, to some extent without us even realizing. So corporations, governments, they have a responsibility to uphold the standards, the same standards we would have in a physical world, to some extent, maybe even more so.
Yeah, and you've got the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, but there's no enforcement mechanism. It's kind of like, okay, sure, we promise.
Yeah, that's right. And it doesn't necessarily fit with corporate interest, right? Of, let's say, the platform holders or whatnot at that scale that you are kind of hinting at or describing. Because the goal is to always collect data, push the functionality as far and wide as possible. The more education, potentially the less usage, right? The less data sharing. That's not in the best interest of the people that are the companies that want to sell advertising, push e-commerce, push the learning, things like that. So there's a way to make both happen while also keeping the world safe. I'm a firm believer in that, and I'm coming at it from a technology standpoint. I also found you had one point, and then I promised Michael I'll stop talking. You had one comment that I thought was really interesting. It was about the education piece. And then it just kind of triggered a thought for me about how, technology is designed, I would say, to be the great equalizer, right? To allow anybody from anywhere to connect and to speak and to be a part of something and to create something, and to create a community and engage. And I think in many ways it's doing that, but I think we still have some work to do. I think there are still costs we have to think about. You created a scenario of that you are sharing. So, some people in some parts of the world, they can't even afford to be part of the experience that you were describing, based on, their internet or based on the pricing of these devices. Or, another conversation before XR and metaverse came around, or it became such a popular topic. It's the same concept around, social followers. There's still some social controls, and I think some social factors we should be thinking about around technology and how that also can create division. And I don't think that's what technology has been designed to do. It's been designed to kind of create that equalization and that ultimate democracy. And I think in some ways we have to catch ourselves and say, okay, are we sticking to that original mission? And I don't know if that was the intention of what you're kind of getting at, but that was what kind of triggered in my mind. And I thought it was really astute of you to bring some of that up and kind of loop that around. So
No, and I love it. I think that, we need more technologists who have that, who keep that the dream, the mission of, equalizing access to tech and using tech for good things, but also keeping in mind the reality of, okay, well, what do we need to enable that? Because it's not just developing the really cool technology, it's making sure that people can access and use it.
absolutely. I think that's the holy grail. And ideally, it's technology that's moving the world forward. Tools, education, trainings, research, search, products, applications, code, whatever that can move the world forward. I think that's the holy grail of what we're trying to achieve, for everyone to have equal access to those kind of opportunities. Okay, I said I would stop talking, Michael.
I think that's a great note to go to some questions.
Brienne, you don't ever have to stop talking at all, as far as I'm concerned. I can listen to the two of you, for a very long time. That was just a very brilliant conversation, and I, for one, learned a lot from listening to it. While we wait for other folks to put questions into the question box, I thought I would take the privilege of the chair to ask myself a question. It's kind of pushing back a little bit, Emmie, on what you said about, if I understand it correctly, you said we don't need specific XR regulation, and just wondering whether that's true. Just as we're beginning to understand that the way human rights and ethics issues present themselves in XR seem to me a little bit different than other technologies we've encountered. Uh, but I also, if I may, there's a kind of a second part to the question, which is I'd like you to answer that technically, like both of you, because for people like me who are woefully inadequate in understanding the technology for of all of this, I wonder if you can. I guess I don't know exactly what I'm asking. Like, what's the difference between the technology behind XR and the technology between AI, and why do you think they're similar enough that the regulation can be the same?
So I'll take a first stab at that. So I think what there are definitely XR specific issues that we have to address with regulation. At least in the European context right now, I don't know if the best way to address that is with like an omnibus XR act, like akin to the AI Act. Because there are areas where you can build on, they already have the GDPR, the data protection legislation, that has a definition of biometric data and things that can be interpreted and applied to extended reality. Now, that being said, there are areas where things, additional legislation may have to be passed, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel and start everything from scratch. Is kind of what I was arguing. In the US, there's going to be a lot more ground to cover because we don't have a comprehensive federal data protection bill. So you're going to have to start, really from there, which is, it's I could go on about the US's lack of data protection legislation for a long time, but it does present an interesting opportunity, which is to create a comprehensive data protection bill that thinks about XR and biometric data from the get-go, instead of us having to think about, okay, well, does this apply to aggregated biometric data and things like that? It's an interesting opportunity to kind of start from scratch and maybe leapfrog over some of the outstanding issues. In terms of the technology, I mean, they are different technologies, but again, because AI is kind of intertwined with a lot of XR, you will have parts of AI specific legislation that applies to XR, or areas where it should apply. So there's one interesting clause in the AI Act that talks about biometric identification in physical spaces. So real-time biometric identification by law enforcement is banned, but specifically in physical spaces. So that's an area where this regulation could, and honestly probably should, apply to virtual environments, but it doesn't. And that's one opportunity where you've got, okay, these two technologies are very intertwined, but we kind of miss this opportunity. So throughout the legislative and interpretive process, it's going to be really important to think about, okay, where are these technologies intersecting, and what does it mean? What are the decisions we're making about this mean for one or the other?
Yeah, I think definitely, Mike, just really quick, I was going to say there's technological nuances to both of them. I'm not an expert in XR, but I definitely think AI needs to be regulated in its own right? And I think part of the challenges that everyone has with the AI regulation discussion is that AI gets to a point, real artificial intelligence gets to a point where it has a mind of its own. Right. And I think that's part of the challenge with the actual science, depending on which techniques you're dealing with. And I think that's why people have a challenge thinking through the long-term impacts of it in the way that models can actually be self-learning. And I completely agree with Emmie on her perspective of this.
Excellent, thank you. Before we conclude, I want to give both of you a chance to have like a final word. Is there something that you're going back over the discussion that you feel you want to address that we didn't address? In particular, if you could do that. Otherwise, just everyone, I think, would be interested in kind of your conclusion of this conversation.
one thing actually, so when Brienne and I were chatting about the human rights framework, I think we both agree that it's, you know, really useful and critical to think about. But I think that it's one that platforms are kind of reluctant to adopt because they don't want to say, okay, we are having an impact on your human rights. Like it's a very kind of weighty statement. And I think it also speaks to, you know, sometimes I feel uncomfortable saying, oh, I research the human rights impact of extended reality technology because it sounds very, you know, academic and uppity. But I think that we need to, I think that talks like this help bring it down to earth for people to show, okay, these are what my human and fundamental rights are. It's things like privacy, it's things like freedom of expression, terms that we throw around a lot. And it's kind of, you know, fitting them into this framework and showing people that like, okay, this is important to consider, and this is, you know, um a valid approach and a really valuable way to think about rights and to protect you, not only again in an immersive XR setting where you may or may not that you may or may not ever access, but just online as a whole, as you know, the digital becomes more and more important in our lives. It's going to be more and more important to make sure that people's rights are protected in ways that you know are not these kind of broad sweeping statements, but that really concretely, tangibly impact their lives.
That makes complete sense. And I think this is a really important topic because there are nuances to, you know, AR, VR, and XR, as Emmie has shared, nuances from gaming technologies, nuances from how AI is a part of that discussion, and has a stage in all of those different areas. And I think the power of AI is only growing. It's becoming a larger part of the conversation every day. And how businesses leverage AI, how consumers leverage AI. These are all different discussions at different stages. So to whatever extent we can expand the topic more and more every day to talk about how do these technologies intersect? How does AI become part of our daily life? And how do we understand how to leverage the technology for our productivity, for our enjoyment, for any way to augment our human capabilities without sacrificing our data privacy, without sacrificing corporate security, while also understanding its consequences. I think this is a really important conversation, and we should be having it as much as possible so we understand what the roadmap will start to look like in the next couple of years, because I think the world will look like a very different place. So we want to make sure we can all keep up with that.
Yeah, that's a great way to end the discussion, Brienne. It's this discussion will go on and on. I want to thank you, Emmie, and thank you, Brienne, for this brilliant conversation. You touched on so many interesting issues, and you are both immensely knowledgeable about both the ethical and human rights issues and also the technological issues about XR, AI, and other technology. We're all very grateful for your taking the time to join us today. I hope the online participants will join me now in, appropriately, I think, a round of virtual applause.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Michael. And
Take care.
Thank you, guys. Much
thank you.
appreciated.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, guys.